The great hall of the Ironwood Citadel had never held so many wolves, and Lyra had never felt so small. She stood half-hidden behind a marble pillar, the coarse linen of her servant's tunic scratching at her skin, a stark contrast to the silks and velvets that flowed around her like a river of jewels. The air was thick with the scent of pine from the Yule garlands, roasted meats from the kitchens where she'd toiled all day, and something else, something electric and primal. It was the scent of anticipation, the scent of power. Tonight was the great mating ball, the once-in-a-decade event where the Alpha King, Alaric of the Blackwood line, would finally choose his Lunar Queen. Lyra's stomach twisted with a familiar hollow ache. It wasn't just the hunger that gnawed at her. The servants were always fed last, and tonight the feast was so grand she doubted there would be more than scraps left. It was a deeper, more profound emptiness, a loneliness that seemed to echo in the vast vaulted space of the hall. She was an orphan, a no-name wolf with a diluted bloodline, left on the citadel's steps as a pup. Her wolf was small and timid, a whisper of a thing that rarely stirred. Here, surrounded by the powerful, the beautiful, and the chosen, she was less than a ghost. Her only purpose was to be invisible, to refill a goblet of wine, to clear a plate, and to fade back into the shadows. She watched him from her hiding place, King Alaric. He sat upon the onyx throne, a masterpiece of polished stone and silver inlay, but he was the true centerpiece of the hall. He was power made manifest, a king in his prime. Broad shoulders were encased in a tunic of the deepest black, embroidered with the silver direwolf of his house. His hair was the color of a moonless night, and even from this distance she could feel the intensity of his gaze as he surveyed the throng of hopeful she-wolves presenting themselves before him. They said his wolf was a colossal beast, a true alpha of alphas, with fur like shadow and eyes of molten gold. They said his rule was firm but just, and that his heart was as vast as the kingdom he commanded. A sharp pang, hot and sudden, struck her low in her belly. Lyra gasped, pressing a hand against her hip. It felt like a hot coal had been pressed against her skin. She stumbled, her vision swimming for a second. The noise of the hall, the music, the laughter, all faded into a dull roar. A new scent cut through the cacophony, a scent that made her own weak wolf sit up and howl with a yearning so fierce it stole her breath. It was the smell of a winter storm, of ancient pines and cold, clean earth. It was a scent that promised safety and power and home. It was his scent, the king's. Her eyes snapped to the throne, and for a heart-stopping second, his gaze met hers across the crowded room. Molten gold locked onto her plain brown eyes. The world fell away. The pillar she leaned against, the chattering nobles, the weight of her own exhaustion, it all vanished. There was only the king. The bond, the fated mate bond that every shifter dreamed of, slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. It was a golden cord, shimmering in the space between them, pulling her, claiming her, whispering a single word in her soul. Mine. He saw it too. She knew he did. A flicker of shock, of raw, undisguised disbelief crossed his regal features. He half rose from his throne, his eyes wide, his focus entirely on her, the little brown mouse in the corner. The world held its breath. The golden cord between them thrummed, singing with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. He was her mate. The king was her mate. The hollow ache inside her was suddenly filled with a brilliant, blinding light. But then, something shifted. Lady Lysara Van Thorn, a vision of icy beauty in a gown of silver brocade, stepped smoothly into his line of sight. She was the daughter of the powerful southern lord, the most politically advantageous match. the one everyone expected him to choose. She placed a delicate hand on his arm, her red lips curving into a proprietary smile as she offered him a goblet of deep crimson wine. "My king," her voice purred, just loud enough to carry. "You look troubled. Perhaps some wine to calm your spirit." Alaric's gaze was torn from Lyra. He looked down at Lysara, then at the goblet. A flicker of confusion clouded his eyes. He hesitated, his hand still outstretched as if reaching for Lyra. But Lysara pressed the goblet into his hand with practiced ease. "For the kingdom," she murmured, a promise and a command in one. He looked back toward the pillar, searching for Lyra, his brow furrowed in a desperate, frantic way. But the moment was broken. The pressure of the court, of his duty, descended upon him. He lifted the goblet, his eyes still scanning the crowd, and drank. The moment the wine touched his lips, the golden cord between them wavered. It frayed like a rope being cut, strand by agonizing strand. Lyra cried out, a small, wounded sound that was lost in the music. The burning mark on her hip flared with an agony that made her knees buckle. She watched in horror as the light in Alaric's eyes dimmed. The recognition, the shock, the desperate yearning, it all drained away, replaced by a cool, placid emptiness. He blinked slowly, like a man waking from a dream he couldn't quite recall. He looked at Lysara, who was smiling her triumphant, venomous smile. He looked at the court. He looked right past the pillar where Lyra was collapsing, and his eyes held no recognition at all. The bond wasn't just muted, it was severed. A gaping, bleeding wound opened in Lyra's soul where it had been. The pain was absolute, a spiritual death that eclipsed the gnawing hunger in her belly and the ache in her bones. "I have made my choice," Alaric announced, his voice flat, devoid of the passion it had held moments before. He took Lysara's hand and raised it for the hall to see. "Lady Lysara Van Thorn will be my Lunar Queen." A roar of approval went up from the court, particularly from the Van Thorn faction. But a confused murmur rippled through others. His beta, an old grizzled wolf named Gunnar, stared at his king with deep concern, his nose twitching as if he smelled something foul. He, too, had seen the king's initial reaction. He had seen him look toward the servant's alcove. For Lyra, the cheer was a death knell. The pain, the starvation, the catastrophic heartbreak. It was too much. The last thing she saw was Lysara's smug, cruel gaze finding her in the shadows. A look that said, "You are nothing." Then the world dissolved into blackness. She fainted from starvation and a broken heart at the mating ball, and the Alpha King, her mate, the man whose soul had called to hers, didn't even notice she was gone. She woke on a lumpy cot in the healer's ward, the familiar scent of dried herbs and antiseptic salves filling her nose. Marta, the pack's head healer, a woman with eyes that saw more than most, was pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. "Easy now, child." The old woman's voice was gruff but kind. "You took a nasty turn." "The king," Lyra whispered, her voice cracking. The memory crashed back down on her, and the gaping wound in her soul wept anew. The burning mark on her hip was now a dull, throbbing ache, a constant, agonizing reminder of the connection that had been stolen from her. Marta's expression was grim. "He has announced his betrothal to Lady Lysara. The ceremony is set for the new moon." She didn't need to say more. The finality of it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A king's betrothal was binding. "But he saw me," Lyra insisted, tears welling. "I felt it. The bond. It was there." "I know," Marta said softly, her gaze searching Lyra's face. I saw it too. So did Gunnar. Something is wrong, Lyra. Terribly wrong. The king has not been himself since he drank that wine Lysara gave him. He is vacant. His scent is muted, clouded. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He asked me for a potion for headaches that have been plaguing him. When I examined him, I felt a residue of magic. Dark magic. And something else. Wolfsbane. Not enough to kill, but enough to confuse, to cloud the mind and sever a freshly formed bond. Wolfsbane. Poison. The word hung between them, terrifying and treasonous. Lysara hadn't just stepped in his way. She had cheated. She had poisoned the king to steal a throne that wasn't hers, to steal Lyra's mate. The audacity of it was breathtaking, but the evil of it was bone-chilling. The Van Torns were known for their ambition, but this was an act of war against the Pack's most sacred law. Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra's world became a living hell. She was forced back to her duties, a ghost haunting the halls of the man she loved. She had to serve at the betrothal dinner, her hands trembling as she poured wine for the happy couple. Alaric would look at her, his eyes passing over her without a flicker of interest, and each time it was like a fresh knife to her heart. Lysara, however, never missed an opportunity to torment her. She would call for the clumsy servant girl, or drop a fork just to watch Lyra bend to retrieve it. She would talk loudly about her wedding plans, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that was more venomous than any poison. The bond sickness began to take its toll on them both. Lyra grew thinner, paler, the ache in her soul a constant fever. But the effect on Alaric was far more dramatic. The kingdom whispered that the king was going mad. The placid emptiness that had first settled over him began to crack, revealing a terrifying rage beneath. He would fly into sudden, inexplicable furies, tearing apart his royal chambers, his roars of frustration echoing through the citadel at night. He was hunting for something, everyone said, a ghost, a memory, a scent he couldn't place. He was tearing the kingdom apart, looking for a woman whose face he couldn't remember. Lyra touched the searing brand on her hip and knew the truth. He was looking for her. His soul was screaming for its other half, even if his mind didn't know why. One morning, a week before the wedding, Lyra was scrubbing floors when a wave of nausea so profound washed over her that she had to grip the bucket to keep from falling. It had been happening for days. Marta found her retching in an alley behind the kitchens. The old healer's eyes were sharp. She took Lyra's wrist, her thumb pressing against the pulse point. She looked at Lyra's pale face, the new shadows under her eyes. "When was your last moon cycle, child?" Marta asked, her voice gentle. Lyra's blood ran cold. With the heartbreak and the sickness, she hadn't even thought. She counted back. Her eyes widened in panic. She looked at Marta, her heart hammering against her ribs. The healer just nodded grimly. "The bond may have been severed by poison," she said, her voice heavy with significance. "But it was there long enough to plant a seed. Or two." Pregnant. She was pregnant. With the Alpha King's heirs. A surge of fierce, primal protectiveness washed over her, so strong it momentarily eclipsed her heartbreak. It wasn't just her life at stake anymore. If Lysara discovered she was carrying Alaric's children, she wouldn't just mock her, she would eliminate her. She and the unborn pups were a threat to Lysara's claim, to her future as queen. They were living proof of a bond that Lysara had tried to erase. "You cannot stay here," Marta said, her words stark and final. "She will kill you, and she will do it before the king's mind clears, if it ever does. You must run, Lyra. You must run and hide until the truth can be brought to light." That night, Marta gave her a small pouch of coins, a thick cloak, and a bundle of dried food. Go north, into the Whisper Wood. There are old cabins there from the last war, long abandoned. Find one deep in the forest where no one will look for you. Gunnar suspects something foul, but his first loyalty is to the king. He cannot help you yet. You are on your own. Tears streamed down Lyra's face as she hugged the old woman. What about you? I will stay, Marta said, her face set like stone. Someone must watch the Watchers. Now go, and protect the future of this pack. Lyra fled the citadel under the cover of a moonless sky. She ran like a frightened deer, every shadow looking like a Van Thorn assassin. As she passed the borders of the capital, she risked one last look back at the towering spires of the Ironwood citadel. A roar of pure animalistic agony echoed from the highest tower, the King's Tower. It was a sound of a soul being torn in two. Alaric was screaming her name, not with his voice, but with his spirit. She pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, where the future of the Blackwood line lay hidden. I will keep them safe, she whispered into the wind. I promise. And then she turned and vanished into the darkness of the woods, a hidden queen carrying a royal secret. The Whisperwood lived up to its name. It was an ancient, sprawling forest where the wind sighed constantly through the dense canopy of pine and ironwood trees, making it sound as if the woods themselves were sharing secrets. For Lyra, it became a sanctuary and a prison. She found a dilapidated but sturdy cottage deep within the forest, miles from any known path, its stone chimney crumbling and its roof thatched with moss. It was damp and cold, but it was safe. The first few months were a blur of survival. She learned to set snares for rabbits, to identify edible roots and berries with the instincts her wolf provided, and to fish in the icy stream that ran near the cottage. The pregnancy was hard on her already weakened body. Morning sickness was a constant companion, and the hollow ache of the broken bond never truly faded. Some nights she would wake up screaming, the phantom pain on her hip so intense it felt like a fresh brand. On those nights, she knew Alaric was having one of his rages, his feral spirit lashing out against the cage of his poisoned mind. She would curl into a ball, clutching her growing belly, and weep for the mate she couldn't comfort, and for the children who would be born without a father. Her wolf, once so timid, grew stronger, fueled by a burgeoning maternal instinct. It was a quiet strength, a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer just Lyra, the servant girl. She was a mother. That one simple fact became her anchor in a sea of despair. She talked to her babies, humming old pack lullabies as she patched the roof or tended her small, struggling garden. She told them stories of their father, not the mad king the rumors painted, but the powerful, just alpha she had seen for that one brief, glorious moment. 6 months passed. Her belly was round and full, the lives within her making their presence known with gentle flutters that soon became insistent kicks. She felt them, 2 distinct heartbeats, 2 tiny wolves growing within her. Twins. The knowledge was both a joy and a terror. Back in the capital, the world was unraveling. The few travelers and trappers she cautiously gleaned information from spoke of chaos. King Alaric had married Lizara, but their union was a disaster. The king was a recluse, prone to violent outbursts, his grip on the kingdom slipping. He trusted no one, not even his own royal guard. Lord Van Thorn, Lizara's father, was using the power vacuum to place his own men in positions of authority, effectively ruling through his daughter. The kingdom was groaning under the weight of their greed. The only beacon of hope was Gunnar, the king's beta. The trappers said he had not given up on his alpha. He defied Lord Van Thorn at every turn, trying to hold the kingdom together, all the while conducting a quiet, desperate search. He was looking for a ghost, they said, a servant girl who had vanished from the castle on the night of the mating ball. A girl the king sometimes mumbled about in his fevered nightmares. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Lyra was gathering firewood, a scent on the wind made her freeze. It was wolf, but not one she recognized. It was followed by the snap of a twig nearby. Her heart leaped into her throat. Her first instinct was to run, but she was too heavy, too slow. Her protective instincts flared, and instead she flattened herself behind a thicket of ferns, her hand resting on the small axe she used for splitting kindling. A man emerged into the clearing. He was old, broad-shouldered, with a grizzled grey beard and the weary eyes of a lifelong soldier. He wore the leathers of the king's guard, though they were travel-stained and worn. His scent was of steel, loyalty, and deep, abiding sorrow. Lyra's breath caught. It was Gunnar, the king's baiter. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was simply tracking, his head low, his gaze sweeping the ground. He stopped near the stream, kneeling to examine a faint footprint in the mud. Hers. He looked up, his gaze scanning the trees, and his eyes, full of a hunter's wisdom, landed directly on her hiding spot. He didn't draw his weapon. He simply held up his empty hands. "I am not here to harm you," he called out, his voice a low rumble. "My name is Gunnar. I am baiter to King Alaric." Lyra remained hidden, her heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't trust anyone from the capital. "I saw what happened at the ball," Gunnar continued, his voice laced with regret. "I saw him choose you, and I saw what that Van Thorn witch did. I've been searching for you for months. The king, he's not well. He's lost without you, even if he doesn't know why. The pack needs its true Lunar." Slowly, cautiously, Lyra rose from her hiding place. Gunnar's eyes widened as he saw her, his gaze dropping to her heavily pregnant stomach. A look of profound understanding and awe dawned on his face. He took a half step forward, then stopped, as if not wanting to frighten her. "The heirs," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "You carry the royal heirs." He dropped to one knee in the damp leaves, bowing his head in deference, not to her, the servant girl, but to the mother of his future alphas. "Forgive me, my Lunar. Forgive us for failing you." Before Lyra could respond, before the relief could fully wash over her, the woods exploded into chaos. A whistling sound cut the air, and a crossbow bolt slammed into the tree trunk right beside Gunnar's head, making him flinch back. From the shadows of the dense pines, 4 figures emerged. They were cloaked and masked in black, moving with the silent, deadly grace of trained assassins. They smelled of cold iron and malice, their scents tainted and wrong. Van Thorn's men. "Well, well," one of them rasped, his eyes fixed on Lyra's belly. "Lord Van Thorn was right. The little stray did have pups." Gunnar was on his feet in an instant, drawing the massive broadsword from his back. He planted himself squarely in front of Lyra, a grizzled bastion of defiance. "You will not touch her," he growled, his voice the epitome of a baiter's authority. "The old wolf still has teeth," the lead assassin mocked. "But there are 4 of us. Lord Van Thorn wants the evidence of the king's mistake erased permanently." They attacked. The clearing became a whirlwind of flashing steel and snarling fury. Gunnar was a master, his sword a blur, but he was 1 against 4. He parried a thrust, spun to block a slash from behind, but another assassin's blade slipped past his guard, slicing a deep gash in his arm. He grunted in pain, but didn't falter. Lyra watched in terror, her hands protectively wrapped around her stomach. She was trapped, useless. Gunnar fought like a cornered lion, taking down one of the assassins with a powerful cleave, but the odds were too great. A second blade caught him in the thigh, and he stumbled, his leg buckling. The lead assassin saw his opening and lunged, not at Gunnar, but at Lyra. He raised a poisoned dagger, its tip glinting with a sickly green substance. Time seemed to slow down. Lyra saw the dagger arc toward her belly. She saw Gunnar's desperate, failing attempt to intercept it. A scream tore from her throat, a sound of pure maternal terror. And in that moment, she called out with her soul, a desperate, silent plea to the one person who could save them. Alaric! As if summoned by her very soul, a sound ripped through the forest that was not wolf nor man, but something more. It was a roar of such cataclysmic rage that the ground itself seemed to tremble. The assassins froze, their heads snapping toward the direction of the sound. An instant later, a monstrous shape burst through the trees, a blur of shadow and fury. It was a wolf of impossible size, larger than any she had ever seen, its fur the color of midnight, its muscles cording like thick ropes beneath its hide. It moved with unnatural speed, a living tempest of claws and teeth. But it was the eyes that stopped Lyra's heart. They were the color of molten gold, burning with a terrifying feral madness, and they were fixed on the assassin with the dagger. Alaric. He hit the assassin like a thunderbolt, his massive jaws closing around the man's sword arm with a sickening crunch of bone. He didn't just bite, he tore, ripping through flesh and sinew, tossing the man aside like a broken doll. The remaining two assassins stared in stark terror at the feral king they had been sent to betray. Their training, their arrogance, it all melted away in the face of this primal incarnation of an alpha's wrath. They turned to flee, but there was no escape. Alaric was on them in a heartbeat. He was not a king dispensing justice. He was an animal protecting his territory, his mate. The fight was brutal and blessedly short. He moved through them, a force of nature, his rage a tangible thing. When it was over, he stood panting in the center of the clearing, the blood of his enemies dripping from his black fur, his golden eyes blazing with an untamed fire. Then his gaze fell on Lyra. The madness in his eyes softened, replaced by a dawning, agonizing confusion. He took a hesitant step toward her, then another. He was still in his wolf form, a terrifying and magnificent beast, but she felt no fear. She only felt the desperate pull of the bond, the mangled, tattered cord between them trying to knit itself back together. He stopped a few feet from her, whining low in his throat, a sound of profound pain and bewilderment. He knew her. His wolf, his soul knew her, even if his mind did not. He lowered his massive head, nudging her hand gently with his wet nose, his scent of pine and winter storm washing over her, familiar and achingly yearned for. "Alaric," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. She reached out a trembling hand and laid it on his head, her fingers sinking into his thick fur. At her touch, a shudder ran through his enormous frame. He fell to his knees in the blood-soaked leaves of the forest floor. A wave of shimmering energy washed over him, and with the sickening sound of breaking and reforming bones, the giant wolf collapsed inward, shrinking and shifting. Where the beast had been, the man now knelt. King Alaric, naked, splattered with blood, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the transformation. He looked up at her, his golden eyes no longer mad, but filled with a torrent of warring emotions, confusion, recognition, and a soul-deep agony. "You," he rasped, his voice raw. It was the first word he had spoken to her since the ball. His gaze dropped from her face to her swollen belly. The truth, undeniable and beautifully real, stood between them. He stared, his eyes wide with a dawning horror and a miraculous wonder.
They told me you were gone,"
he whispered, his voice breaking.
I couldn't remember your face, only your scent. I have been chasing your scent for months."
His trembling hand hovered over her stomach, inches from the taut fabric of her dress. He looked up at her, his eyes pleading, asking for something he didn't feel he had the right to.
"May I?"
he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Lyra nodded, her own tears falling freely now. He pressed his palm gently against her belly. The moment his skin touched the fabric separating him from his children, a jolt, powerful and electric, shot through all three of them. The bond, the true, fated bond, snapped back into place not as a gentle cord, but as a tidal wave of feeling, of love, of rightness. The burning mark on Lyra's hip flared with a searing, cleansing heat, erasing the dull ache and leaving behind a warmth that spread through her entire body. In response to their father's touch, both babies kicked at once, a violent, joyful announcement of their presence. The Alpha King, the mad king who had torn his kingdom apart, looked from her belly to her face, and he wept. Great, racking sobs of grief and relief shook his powerful frame as he knelt in the dirt, his hand pressed to the children he never knew he had, reunited at last with the mate he had been tricked into rejecting. If you believe that true love is worth burning a kingdom down for, smash that like button. Subscribe for more epic shifter romances, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if you found out you were a secret queen? The raw, unfiltered emotion of the moment held them suspended in time. Alaric's tears were not just of joy, but of a profound, soul-crushing guilt. "I rejected you," he choked out, his forehead now resting against her belly as if in prayer. "In front of everyone. I let them hurt you. I let you go." "You are not yourself, Alaric," Lyra said softly, her fingers gently stroking his dark, matted hair. "She poisoned you, Lysara. She drugged your wine." His head snapped up, his golden eyes flashing with a new, terrifying clarity. The feral madness was gone, replaced by the sharp, cold fury of a king betrayed. "Poisoned," he repeated, the word a blade of ice. It wasn't a question. It was a realization, a key turning a lock in his clouded memory. He closed his eyes, his face contorting as fragmented images assaulted him. Lysara's triumphant smile, the cloying sweetness of the wine, the sudden fog in his mind, the golden cord to Lyra snapping. "Wolfsbane," he growled, the name of the poison coming to him from the depths of his instincts. A compound, designed to cloud the mind and suppress the bond. He looked at Lyra, the full weight of the conspiracy crashing down on him. "I did not choose her," he roared, the sound echoing through the quiet woods, a promise of vengeance. "I never chose her. I woke up 3 days after the ball screaming your name, and no one knew who I was talking about. They told me I'd had a fever dream, that you never existed." A groan from nearby reminded them they were not alone. Gunnar was struggling to sit up, his hand pressed against the gushing wound in his thigh. He was pale, his breathing shallow. "My king," he gasped, relief warring with pain on his face. "You are... you." Lyra rushed to his side. "He's losing too much blood," she said, her voice tight with panic. She ripped a strip of fabric from the hem of her dress to make a tourniquet, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. The dagger that had wounded him was likely poisoned. Alaric was beside them in an instant, his kingly authority returning with every breath. He knelt, examining the wound with a practiced eye. The blade was poisoned, a slow-acting neurotoxin. He won't last the journey back to the citadel. A desperate primal power surged within Lyra.
The same maternal instinct that had strengthened her wolf now screamed at her to save this man, this loyal soldier who had protected her and her children with his life. She couldn't let him die. She placed her hands over the wound, not thinking, only feeling. She closed her eyes and focused all her will, all her love for her children, for her mate, on the man before her. She imagined a light, pure and warm, pouring from her palms into his broken body, cleansing the poison, knitting the flesh back together.
A soft, golden luminescence began to glow from her hands. Alaric and Gunnar both stared, mouths agape. The light pulsed, growing brighter, sinking into Gunnar's wound. The flesh beneath her palms stitched itself together, the angry red fading, the bleeding slowing and then stopping completely. A faint black vapor, like smoke, was drawn out of the gash, dissipating into the air. When Lyra finally pulled her hands away, exhausted and dizzy, the deep, life-threatening wound was gone, replaced by a thin pink scar that was already beginning to fade. Gunnar flexed his leg, his eyes wide with disbelief. "By the moon, mother," he whispered, staring at Lyra with newfound reverence. "What are you?" Alaric looked at her, not with shock, but with a deep, resonating awe. It was as if another piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. "You are not just any wolf," he said, his voice soft. "That light, it's the magic of the first Lunar, the healing light. It has not been seen in our bloodline for 1,000 years. It was said only the mate of a true alpha, one who carried the seed of a white wolf, could wield it." He looked at her, then at her belly, and a slow, wondrous smile spread across his face. "You are a queen in more than name, my Lyra. You are a vessel of the ancient magic." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and profound. Lyra was more than just a fated mate. She was the return of a lost power, a forgotten legacy. The children she carried were not just heirs. They were the dawn of a new age. But first, they had to reclaim their kingdom. "We need to get you somewhere warm," Alaric said, his voice shifting from awe to practicality. He stood, his nakedness a stark reminder of his primal nature, completely unself-conscious. He was the alpha, and this was his territory. He walked to one of the dead assassins and stripped him of his cloak, wrapping it around his waist. He then gently helped Lyra to her feet. "Your cottage," Gunnar said, now standing, testing his miraculously healed leg. "It's nearby." The small, dilapidated cottage became a royal war room. While Lyra made a thin broth from her meager supplies, Alaric and Gunnar planned. The rage was still in Alaric, a controlled inferno now, channeled into a cold, calculated strategy. He was no longer the mad king. He was the avenging alpha, his mind sharp, his purpose clear. "Lord Vanthorne has overplayed his hand," Alaric said, pacing the small room. "He has his men controlling the treasury and the city gates. The citadel itself will be loyal to Lysara, and by extension to her father. A direct assault would be costly." "Not all are loyal to the Vanthornes," Gunnar countered. "Many of the old guard, the northern lords, they resent the southern influence. They remember your father, and they see the weakness in your absence. They just need a leader. They need to see their true king has returned." Alaric stopped pacing and looked at Lyra, who was ladling broth into a wooden bowl. He walked to her, taking the bowl from her hands and placing it on the table. He took her hands in his. "And their true queen," he said, his voice full of conviction. "They need to see the mate the moon chose for me. They need to see the mother of the future alphas. You are our greatest weapon, Lyra. Your presence, the truth of this bond, it will shatter Lysara's lies." "They will say I am a servant, a nobody," Lyra whispered, doubt creeping in. "They will say I trapped you." "Then they will face me,"
Alaric growled, his protective instincts flaring. But they won't. When they see us together, they will feel the truth of the bond. And when they learn of the poison, of the assassins sent to murder my pregnant mate, the pack will turn on the Van Torns like a tide of righteous fury. He looked at Gunnar. Send word to the Loyalists. Tell them to meet us at the old outpost on Raven's Peak. Tell them the king has found his Lunar, and we are coming to cleanse our house. As Gunnar slipped out into the night to begin his mission, Alaric turned back to Lyra. The tiny cottage felt charged with an intimacy that was both new and ancient. He was still just wearing the assassin's cloak, and the firelight played over the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. He looked at her, his Alpha King persona melting away to reveal the man, his mate. "I have dreamed of you," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "In the madness, in the fog, there was always you, a warmth, a scent of home, a feeling that I was missing a part of my own soul. I am so sorry, Lyra. Sorry for every moment of fear you endured alone, every cold night, every pang of hunger." He reached out, his calloused fingers gently tucking a stray strand of her brown hair behind her ear. "I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you, to all three of you." He leaned in, his forehead pressing against hers. It was the touch of a soul finding its harbor after a long and violent storm. The scent of him, pine and winter, was no longer a phantom memory but a grounding reality. Lyra closed her eyes, leaning into his strength, allowing herself for the first time in months to feel safe. The future was uncertain, a battle loomed on the horizon, but in this moment, with her mate's arms around her and her children safe within her, she was whole. The reclamation had begun. The march on the Ironwood Citadel was not a grand procession of armies, but a gathering storm. Gunnar's message had spread like wildfire through the network of loyal packs. They came from the northern mountains and the western riverlands, old wolves who valued honor above politics. They met Alaric, Lyra, and Gunnar at the Raven's Peak outpost, a crumbling stone fortress that overlooked the capital. When the pack lords saw Lyra, a heavily pregnant but radiant figure standing beside their returned king, a collective gasp went through the assembly. They could feel it, the undeniable, powerful hum of a true mate bond, something that could not be faked. Alaric stood before them, not as a madman, but as the formidable alpha they remembered, his eyes clear and sharp with purpose. "The House of Van Thorn has committed treason," Alaric announced, his voice booming across the stone courtyard. "They poisoned my mind to sever my bond with my true mate, your Lunar Queen." He placed a possessive, protective hand on Lyra's stomach. "They forced upon me a false mate to usurp my throne, and when they discovered that my true Lunar carried the heirs to this pack, they sent assassins to murder her and my unborn children." A wave of shocked and furious snarls rippled through the gathered wolves. The murder of a pregnant female, especially the Lunar carrying alpha heirs, was the most unforgivable of crimes. It was a sin against the pack, against nature, against the moon itself. "Lysana Van Thorn sits on a stolen throne," Alaric continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "And her father pulls the strings of this kingdom. We are here to cut those strings. We will take back our home. We will expose their lies, and we will restore honor to the Blackwood line." Their plan was simple and daring. They would not lay siege to the city, which would harm the innocents within. Instead, they would use the element of surprise. The winter solstice was in 2 days, a time of a grand feast in the Great Hall. It was the perfect opportunity to walk directly into the heart of the beast. Marta, the healer, had managed to get a message to Gunnar. She would unbar a small, forgotten postern gate on the eastern wall at the height of the celebration. Lyra felt a tremor of fear. To walk back into that hall, the scene of her greatest humiliation, felt like facing a nightmare. But then she felt Alaric's hand tighten on hers, his strength flowing into her. She looked at the loyal faces around her, wolves willing to fight and die for her children. Her fear solidified into resolve. She was not the timid servant girl anymore. She was the Moon Mother, and she would fight for her family. On the night of the solstice, they moved like shadows. A blizzard had descended upon the capital, a perfect cover for their approach. Alaric, Lyra, Gunnar, and 20 of their most trusted warriors slipped through the postern gate Marta had opened. The sounds of raucous celebration from the great hall echoed through the cold stone corridors. It was a jarring contrast to the tense silence of their mission. Alaric led them through the servants' passages that Lyra knew so well, a bitter irony that the paths of her servitude would now lead to her reclamation. They paused behind the great tapestries that flanked the entrance to the hall. Alaric peeked through a slit in the fabric. The scene was one of decadent chaos.
Lord Van Thorn sat beside the onyx throne, holding court like he was the king himself, his face flushed with wine. And on the throne, looking bored and imperious, was Lysara. She wore a crown that didn't belong to her, a circlet of silver and moonstones that seemed to reject her, sitting awkwardly on her perfectly coiffed hair. "Now," Alaric whispered. He strode into the great hall, not from the main entrance, but from the shadows by the throne. The loyal warriors fanned out behind him, securing the exits. Gunnar stood at his right, his sword drawn. And on his left, her head held high, was Lyra. A hush fell over the hall. Music sputtered to a stop. Laughter died in throats. Jaws dropped. They were staring at a ghost. A king they thought lost to madness, now standing tall and clear-eyed. And beside him, the servant girl who had vanished, now unmistakably the king's chosen. Her pregnant form a testament to a truth they had all been forced to deny. Lysara leaped to her feet, her face a mask of fury and panic.
"Guards! Seize him! He's mad! He's an imposter!"
Lord Van Thorn, for his part, was already shouting for his personal guard, but the pack wolves in the hall were frozen, their instincts warring with their orders. They could feel the power radiating from Alaric, the righteous fury of a true alpha. They could feel the bond humming between him and Lyra. "I am your Alpha King," Alaric's voice cut through the chaos, imbued with alpha command. "And I have returned to reclaim my throne from the traitors who stole it."
"Lies!"
Lysara shrieked, her composure cracking.
"He chose me! You all saw it! This servant slut means nothing. She is a nobody."
"Did he choose you, Lysara?" Alaric asked, his voice dangerously calm as he advanced on the dais. "Or did you force his hand with a poisoned goblet?" Lysara paled. Lord Van Thorn's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. The pack was listening now, the truth of Alaric's words resonating in the air.
"You speak treason!" Lord Van Thorn boomed, trying to regain control. "My daughter is the rightful Lunar Queen."
"My queen stands beside me," Alaric declared, pulling Lyra forward slightly. "The woman who carries my sons. The woman your assassins tried to murder in the Whisperwood." A collective gasp, sharp and horrified, swept the room. This was the final confirmation. The accusation of poisoning was damnable, but the attempted murder of the pack's heirs was unforgivable. The undecided wolves in the hall began to turn, their glares focusing on Lysara and her father. Seeing her power crumble, Lysara did the one thing she had left to do. She panicked. With a snarl, she grabbed the nearest person, Marta, the old healer, who had been standing near the throne. Lysara pulled a small, jeweled dagger from her sleeve and pressed it to Marta's throat.
"Stay back!" she screamed, her eyes wild. "All of you, or the old crone dies!"
Gunnar took a step forward, but Alaric held up a hand, stopping him. He knew Lysara was desperate, and the desperate wolf is a dangerous one. "Let her go, Lysara," Alaric said, his voice low and steady. "There is no escape for you."
"There is always an escape," she hissed, dragging Marta with her as she backed away from the throne.
Her hateful eyes landed on Lyra, the source of all her problems. "This is all your fault," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You pathetic, weak little servant. If you had just stayed in the kitchens where you belonged, none of this would have happened. He never loved you. He doesn't even know you." "That is where you are wrong," Lyra said, her own voice ringing out with a newfound strength that surprised even herself. "He knew me before he met me, just as I knew him. That is the nature of a true bond. Something you will never understand, because you value power more than love." Lysara laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "Love? Love doesn't get you a crown, but this will." She shoved Marta away, sending the old woman stumbling into Gunnar's arms. In the same motion, she lunged, not at Alaric, but at Lyra. Her target was not Lyra's heart or throat. The jeweled dagger was aimed directly at the center of Lyra's pregnant belly. It was her fatal mistake. She underestimated the power of a true mate bond, and she underestimated the ferocity of a mother. A protective, incandescent rage erupted inside Lyra. It was a power she had never felt before, ancient and absolute. As Lysara's dagger sliced through the air, time seemed to warp. Lyra didn't move to dodge. She didn't have to. Pain exploded through her body, but it was a pain of transformation, not injury. Golden light flooded the room, erupting from her in a blinding shockwave that threw Lysara backward. Bones broke and reformed with terrifying speed. Where Lyra, the pregnant human woman, had stood, a new creature now towered. It was a wolf, but unlike any they had ever seen. It was enormous, nearly the size of Alaric's own alpha form, but its fur was the color of fresh-fallen snow, shimmering with an ethereal, pearlescent light. Its eyes were not the amber of a normal wolf, but the same molten gold as Alaric's, burning with the fire of ancient magic. A white wolf, the wolf of the first Lunar, the Moon Mother reborn. She caught the dagger with a clawed hand, the blade shattering against her supernatural strength. She let the pieces fall to the floor with a contemptuous clatter. Lysara, sprawled on the floor, stared up at the magnificent, terrifying creature, her mind unable to comprehend what she was seeing. "Impossible," she whimpered. You can't even shift." The white wolf that was Lyra let out a growl that was not just a sound, but a physical force, a wave of pure alpha authority that brought every wolf in the hall, including Lord Van Thorn and his men, to their knees. Only Alaric, her mate, remained standing, his face a mask of utter, breathtaking adoration. Lyra took a step toward the cowering Lysara, a lethal, regal predator. She did not need to attack. Her very presence was a judgment. The pack watched, silent and awestruck, as the true queen, in all her mythic power, stood over the usurper. The lie was broken. The truth was manifest. The servant girl was gone, and in her place stood a legend. The aftermath was swift and absolute. The sight of Lyra's transformation into the legendary White Wolf shattered the last vestiges of the Van Thorn's authority. Lord Van Thorn and his co-conspirators were seized by the King's Guard, their defiance melting into groveling terror.
Lysara, still on the floor, was simply a broken woman, her ambition and arrogance incinerated by the holy fire of Lyra's power. Lyra, still in her magnificent wolf form, looked down at her. She could have ended her with a single swipe of her claws, and the pack would have roared its approval. But vengeance was not her way. She simply held Lysara's gaze, her golden eyes filled not with hatred, but with a profound and regal pity. Then she turned away, dismissing her, the ultimate insult. She walked to Alaric's side, nudging his hand with her snowy head. Alaric placed a hand on her neck, his fingers sinking into her thick, soft fur.
He looked out at the assembled pack, his voice ringing with unshakable authority. "The House of Van Thorn is stripped of its titles and its lands. Lord Varon Van Thorn and all who conspired with him will be exiled to the Withered Lands, their bloodlines barred from holding rank for 1,000 years. His gaze fell upon Lysara. "As for the false Lunar, exile is too kind. She committed a sin against the moon itself. She will be stripped of her name and her wolf. She will live out her days as a human, a nobody, forever barred from the pack, forever severed from the magic she sought to twist to her own ends." It was a fate worse than death for a shifter. To lose one's wolf was to lose half of one's soul. A murmur of grim approval went through the hall. Justice had been served. Later that night, in the quiet of the royal chambers, their chambers, Lyra shifted back. The transformation was gentle this time, a soft fading of light, leaving her standing in the center of the room, her body weary but whole, her babies safe. Alaric wrapped a thick fur robe around her shoulders, his touch tender. "I have never seen anything so beautiful," he whispered, his voice full of reverence. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not just as his mate, but as the incredible, powerful being she was. The unassuming servant girl had been a shell, hiding a goddess. "I didn't know I could do that," she admitted, leaning her head against his chest. "It was like something ancient woke up inside me. When she went for the babies." "It was your heart," he said, kissing the top of her head. "The heart of a mother, the heart of a queen." He pulled back slightly, his golden eyes intense. "There is one last thing we must do, to make it right, to make it permanent." The bond between them was strong, a living thing, but it was not yet complete. The final step, the claiming bite, had never happened. It was the most sacred ritual between fated mates, the physical and spiritual merging of two souls into one. "Claim me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He bared his throat, tilting his head to expose the vulnerable junction of his neck and shoulder. It was the ultimate act of submission from an alpha king, an offering of his complete trust, his life, his soul. "Make it complete, my Lyra, my queen." Her own wolf, the glorious white wolf, rose to the surface. She felt her canines ache as they sharpened and elongated slightly. This was not an act of violence, but of ultimate love. She leaned in, her breath warm against his skin. She sank her teeth into his flesh. A jolt of pure energy, white-hot and ecstatic, surged between them. His scent, his strength, his very essence flooded her. At the same time, she felt her own essence, her light, her love, pour into him. It was a perfect, harmonious union. Two halves of a soul became one. When she pulled back, a new mark graced his skin, a delicate pattern of her teeth that would heal into a silvery scar, a permanent symbol of his devotion to her. He looked at her, his eyes glowing, and she could feel the change in him. The last shadows of the poison were gone, burned away by the purity of their completed bond. He was whole again. He was hers. He then gently turned her, his hands on her shoulders, and lowered his head to her own neck. "My turn," he murmured, and his teeth, sharp and possessive, sank into her skin. The world exploded into light and sensation. His power, his protection, his unending love wrapped around her like a shield. The bond sealed, unbreakable and eternal. 3 weeks later, the great hall was filled once more. But this time, the atmosphere was not one of plotting and tension, but of joyous celebration. It was the day of the true coronation. Lyra stood beside Alaric, not in a servant's tunic, but in a gown of shimmering white silk that accommodated her full belly. The crown of the Lunar queens, the one that had looked so wrong on Lysara, was placed upon her head by a smiling martyr. It settled perfectly, and a soft, warm light seemed to emanate from the moonstones, as if the ancient magic within it was welcoming her home. The pack roared its approval, a single, unified voice of loyalty and love for their Alpha King and their Moon Mother Queen. 2 months after that, in the first blush of spring, Lyra gave birth. The labor was long and difficult, but Alaric never left her side, his hand in hers, their completed bond allowing him to draw some of her pain into himself. As the sun rose, the cries of new life filled the royal nursery. 2 healthy pups, a boy and a girl. They were perfect, a blend of their parents. The boy had his father's dark hair, but when he opened his eyes, they were a soft, gentle brown, like Lyra's had been. The girl had Lyra's lighter features, but her eyes, even in infancy, held the unmistakable molten gold of a true alpha. They were the future. Balance and power, side by side. Alaric held his daughter, his fierce alpha heart melting as she curled a tiny hand around his finger. Lyra held her son, her soul overflowing with a love so vast it felt infinite. They had been through the fire, through poison and betrayal, through madness and despair. They had fought for their family, for their kingdom, and for their love. Alaric looked at Lyra, his mate, his queen, the mother of his children, and his expression was one of complete and utter devotion. He had torn the world apart looking for her, a ghost he couldn't name. Now, holding his family in his arms, his world was finally, blessedly whole. The rejected servant had become the Alpha Queen, the hidden mother had become a legend, and their love story would be told for 1,000 years, a testament to the unbreakable power of a fated bond. From a broken heart to a throne. Lyra's story proves that you can't fight fate. If you enjoyed this story, please hit like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to believe in happy endings.